Right, welcome everybody. Barry and I are just going to take you through a short slide deck tonight. We've just got 3 areas that we want to cover, but before we do that, can we just check everybody's sitting comfortably?
Yeah. Everyone happy? All right, let's all stand up.
Everyone stand up.
Come on. Everyone on their feet.
So we're just going to do a very quick standing poll. What we'd like to understand from you guys is if you deliver software into your live environment less than once a year, could you sit down now, please?
So any project you've been working on, have you delivered once this year? More than that?
Networking software.
Good.
Excellent.
Okay. How many people have released to their customers only once or twice this year? Sit down. Great. Thanks for your honesty. It's good.
Yeah. What about once a quarter? By the way, we did this same exercise in Manchester last night, so there's a little bit of a league table going on here, okay? See how you get on.
Okay, Ben, how about once a month? Every month? Okay, so back down to half the room. Half the room sitting down now.
Should we, what about weekly? Excellent.
Very good.
So actually, if all the people who are sitting down now, if you want to just take a look at the faces of these people, because once you finish this session, it's probably worth talking to these guys to find out what is it they're doing. So should we go a bit further now?
Yeah.
The question is, it doesn't ever include less than once a year.
That's very good. Okay. Who's releasing daily? Very good.
Excellent.
Right. Good round of applause. Well done.
Yeah, well done, guys. Okay, you can all sit down now. Okay, so one of the challenges of this audience here is that people have probably got different levels of understanding. So what we're going to do is we're just going to give you a very quick 101 of each of these subjects, okay, just to bring the level of understanding of the room up to an equal level, okay?
Right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some lean approaches, lean startup movement, and sort of what's been happening in that space. Maybe get some ideas from you guys. So a lot of companies now are all starting to search for the next big idea. I think there's been a recent study from Yale University that I think in 1920 the average age of a company would last for about 67 years. That's down to 15 years now. And by sort of 2020, they're sort of looking at the top 500 traded companies in the US. 75% of them won't exist now. So there's a huge, these innovation cycles in organizations are really starting to change and disrupt our market in a different way that we haven't seen before. And sort of, we're moving towards this serviced economy type idea. I think back in the day we're used to this idea of mass production. Companies would just build these products and just push them out to their customers and expect that their customers would just love them. You know, the classic example like Ford Motor Company when they first started out. They just built cars and they sent them out to people. Everybody got one as long as it was black, right? Here we are today, and the US government have to bail them out because they've stopped listening to what their customers are saying. They're not able to sense and adapt what's happening in the market. They're too rigid in their processes about what they're doing and bought into their products. They can't switch, they can't change. Kodak, another example of where they've really felt this move towards digital photography. You know, what are they doing now? Huge organizations that are really struggling to cope with that change. And it's really about maybe now starting to think about your customer as a co-producer. You know, knowledge is the competitive advantage in this space. It's not necessarily just about what you think your customer wants. You need to have them baked into your process. They need to understand what they want and how you can service that. And that starts to create this nice interaction between the two, and the collaboration of that, how good that is, how successful that is, that's where your revenue starts to come from. And that's where organizations are starting to make these big strides, leapfrogging the competition, changing, disrupting the market. And you can do this in your own organizations, and we need to start thinking about ways about how we can support that. So couple examples then from the lean startup movement is they started to look at other ways to do this. And it was really based about trying to create a scientific type of approach. And this is the idea of putting your actual software out there and measuring the results of what's happening, how people are using it, what do customers respond to that software, am I doing the right thing or not? But using data-driven decisions to make that more objective about what we build next. But very lightweight, tactics very simple, like building prototypes, sketchboarding, rapid prototyping tools like Balsamiq, Azure. You can get them in front of your customers really quickly. Getting your teams, your developers to leave the building, get out of their seat instead of write code, get them to talk to your customers. Low barriers to entry, go down to a coffee shop. How many people in this room have ever showed a customer, after they've written a bit of code, put it on their phone, put it on their laptop, gone home and shown it to someone? Hands up. 2, 3. Getting that fast feedback about what you're doing, what customers want. And I often think it's totally low cost. You could be writing code, going out and showing that to your friends, your customers, getting feedback about what you're doing. Imagine the amount of effort that goes into building a feature, 6 months in development, customer have never seen the light of day, and then there's this big reveal, and they never use that. Huge cost, huge amount of effort. And the biggest waste in our industry is a lot of this happens all the time. It's continually happening all the time. And there's ways to mitigate it. Bring that risk further up. User tests. Get your ideas out in front of your customers. Get their feedback. React to the feedback they give you. Cut down that feedback loop. So, because that's the key part about driving a lot of this. It's conducting these experiments, these hypotheses we have about what we think customers want, and then testing that hypothesis, measuring the results, and baking that into what we do going forward. And trying to make these feedback loops as quick and as short as possible. And this is where we often talk about in the Lean Startup of the idea of minimum viable products. It's minimum. It's not minimum. All right? We're talking like projects where like 6, 12 months worth of work and never see the light of day, never see customers, never get their feedback. No idea. It's the big reveal. I can't tell you what we're working on. It's too secret. Why? Show it to your customers. Show it to people. Get their feedback so you know you're confident. You're conducting these experiments. You're using real data, real feedback to drive your next step to go forward. So, and this is where we sort of talk a little bit about when you have your hypothesis about what you think you might want, it's looking at trying to break that down into small and simple components. What's the riskiest assumption we're making about our product? Let's go and test that. Let's make sure that we have that assumption correct. Let's make sure our customers are really interested in this feature before we start to build it. Let's build some prototypes and show them what the experience might be like. Let's get that right up at the early stage. Let's do it with cards. Let's do it with prototypes. Let's do it with simple bits of functionality that are quick, rapid, and give loads of feedback. Because that's what we're looking for all the time. It's the minimum amount of effort to get the most amount of feedback, most amount of learning to bake into when we go around again. And you probably see this circle floating around on the internet all the time now. This is the concept of how Eric Ries has tried to frame this for him. This about having the idea, building it, to create a product, which you can then test, measure how people interact with that, to give you real data to inform what you're doing next.
And actually, this isn't a new concept. Okay, you've seen it around the Eric Ries circles. This is actually an enhancement from the W. Edwards Deming cycle. We call it the Deming cycle. This is the plan, do, check, and act. Okay, so it's just an evolvement from that principle.
And what people start to think about is that you have the efficiency of going through this loop. What's the time it takes us to go through this loop? But the more times you go through it, the more effective your proposition starts to become, because you've had that feedback from actual customers. They've gone through an idea cycle, they've told you what they think about it, and you've heard that, you've reacted to that, and then you take the next step. Rather than doing all these 10 steps in the dark and never getting their feedback along the way, so you don't have any way to calibrate yourself. You don't have data. You're not learning. So this is really what this concept tries to push into people. So I just thought I'd give an example of some stories just to sort of frame that for people, and ones that worked and ones that didn't work and so forth. All right? So some of the sort of concepts they talk about in this approach is either pivot or preserve. So when you go through that loop of building something, getting feedback and learning, if you're happy that you validate your assumption, you normally go on to the next step. That's called preserve. Pivot is when you get feedback you totally didn't expect, and then you react to that and change the course of the direction of your product. So really nice example of a pivot was the Instagram team. So they actually started off as a product called Bourbon, which was an idea where you'd sort of use like geolocations to sort of tell your friends where you are. Has anyone used Foursquare? Or heard of Foursquare? Okay, yeah, checking in, this is where I am, this is where my friends are. That's what Bourbon was sort of meant to be focused around. And they saw people started to do that, but they also saw that people were taking photos of where they were and caching themselves at the same time. And they sort of said, well, hang on, if they're taking photos, maybe that's where the opportunity is. Let's build a photo sharing site. 7 people, $1 billion later, that's Instagram. Not bad, right? Boo.com. Who's heard of Boo.com? Couple of people? Half the room, maybe? So this is like one of the great internet babies of the early beginning. These guys were great. They were millionaires before anything ever happened. There was huge buzz in the industry about this website that was going to sell you clothing, shoes, everything you wanted. You could look at shoes in 3D, the images spun around. It was like walking through a real virtual shop. This was all over a 46K modem. Right? This is in early 2000s. So they spent huge amounts of money. Huge investment was put behind this organization just on this dream that they sold. No one ever looked at the technology, the capability, would it actually work? So they spent all this effort, all this money, investors gave huge amount of money into this. They launched a site, it went down in seconds. They couldn't keep the site up for weeks, the company eventually folded, gone. Imagine if they had taken the time to try and build even a small bit of that technical infrastructure and test to see if it would work technically. See if people were interested in having this virtual 3D experiment, but really simple. Could have saved all that money, could have been something totally different, could have been really successful. Right? Example of a fold. Groupon. What do you think their MVP was? What was the first thing that they did? So Groupon, discount site, most people have heard about it. Yeah. They spent a huge amount of money, probably about $25, on a WordPress site where they stuck up a page and said, here's a load of deals that are available for people to buy. Is anybody interested in this? They socialized it on media. Groupon. They got that feedback. They put their idea out there. Customers started to respond to that, and they start to enhance the proposition. They start to double down. They start to invest more in, this is working. Let's put more behind it. So this is this scientific approach of testing, getting feedback, data, customers, and then enhancing. So just a little bit of an overview of some of the lean practices we're trying to incorporate into projects and how you can start to do that. How easy is it to build a prototype and show it to your customers? How easy is it to start to implement some of these features in what you're doing today? Well, just something to think about.
So it's interesting when you look at those two words, lean startup. So when I think about lean startup, I get this image of a couple of people, a small entity, bit of investment, just trying to grow this small entity. But actually, a lot of these principles are applicable to a lot more mature organizations and much larger enterprises. Unfortunately, though, we create these very hierarchical, these complex organizations, okay? I mean, a lot of the concepts we're talking about today, we have this concept of nothing has value until it's in the hands of your customers, okay? So everything on the left, all that complexity, when you're trying to get your new feature, your new idea out to the marketplace, it has to go through so much complexity to actually get out there into the hands of the customers. But only once it's out there does it have value, okay? So let's start looking at some of that complexity of the organization. Kanban is actually referred to as an organizational change tool rather than a methodology. And so that's why Kanban's particularly effective at cutting across those silos and bringing teams together. Just to give you a bit of, let's just frame Kanban a little bit. So you'll hear people say Kanban is not a methodology. Nowhere in Kanban does it say you must do test-driven development or iterative development, anything like that, okay? It will sit on top of whatever you currently do. Look at the feedback loops there. In the world of waterfall, we have these long cycles until we get to deployment, at which we get our feedback. Even in the Scrum world, we have iterations before we release to our customers, generally. In Kanban, we aim to deliver working software as and when it's ready, okay? So this is all about batch size, reducing that batch size down further. Some Kanban basics. I'm just going to show you 3 basic concepts in Kanban. The first one is make all work visible. Now, some of us will be saying we've been doing that for years with Agile. We've been putting our card walls up. We've been making everything visible. We'll talk a bit more about that as maybe we need to extend that whole concept. The next one is limit your work in progress to increase your flow. Some people find that counterintuitive. Okay. And the third one is continuously improve. And how do we create that loop of continuous learning, not just about our products, but about the way we're actually delivering those products as well. I'll just take you through quickly how that sort of manifests itself in some real boards that are out there and some real teams. So we're all familiar with the information radiator. We stick a card wall up. A lot of the teams I go around and see tend to have this, where we have our standard analysis, development, sys test, etc., as we go through that value stream. On this particular board, what we're going to do is we're going to insert what we call a queue. Okay? We've got some bottlenecks in test and development potentially. So as we insert a queue in that board, we're suddenly creating a situation where developers can't just keep throwing things into test anymore. Okay? So they have their work in progress, they have their done. The done is a queue. Okay. Of course, if they just keep piling things into their queue, they just get, it's the same problem. Cards stack up in the same way. So this is why we have limits. And when we put limits in place, suddenly it drives a whole bunch of conversations. So suddenly, when a developer can't put anything more into test, all they can do is trigger the question, well, what are we going to do as a team? Let's all start going downstream and let's start to free up some of that capacity. Okay. So actually what we're trying to do here is create a pull system. Because in this world, there's no point pushing more work into that pipeline until you finish the work that's ahead of it. Okay. And in doing that, you're actually reducing the batch size as part of that. You'll find in Kanban, or teams using Kanban, they start to drop iterations. There's no point doing iterations anymore for a lot of them. They find iterations a barrier within themselves. So how do you create that prioritization? How do you select the next piece of work? This is where we quite often have what we call a buffer. So this is a column which tries to avoid starvation for the team. So we're always having those conversations with our stakeholders. What are the next 3 things that are important to you right now? Don't worry about the rest. Just pick out that backlog, the next 3 things, and we pull them into there. The team then pull that work in as and when they've got the capacity to deal with it. The other thing about Kanban, it's end-to-end. How many team boards do you see where you have a showcase and then it's done? What does done mean? Is it done live? Is it kind of pre-live? Are we just sort of this bubble in the middle of the rest of an organisation and we're done, we're developers, we're okay?
Yeah, and when you start to pull this backlog even further up the pipeline, right? I was talking a little bit earlier about lean startup techniques, starting to use your prototyping. Why aren't we starting to show that up here at this part of the board, you know? People that are doing customer discovery, product discovery, finding out about new features that will go into this backlog. Why not start to think about pulling that right to the other end as well? Visualize the entire process.
And this is what we call our value stream, okay? It's the end-to-end steps required to generate a piece of value, okay? But of course, nothing's a perfect world. We still have problems on the way. Work gets blocked. Now, actually, we're all conditioned over the years that if you get stuck with a piece of work, then keep yourself busy, start something else. Let's pull that value forward, let's get ahead on it. But actually, what we do in Kanban is we make it very visible, okay? We make the blocker visible, and then we all focus as a team on unblocking the work, because actually that's the work that was prioritised at the first place as having the most value. Okay, so it's really important that we do this. So we encourage the team to swarm around the board and actually work on what's needed. So even though we've got these kind of vertical areas, we don't silo people into those areas. Okay, we encourage swarming. So a few more concepts: pull work, not push. Focus on unblocking work. By using Kanban, you reduce multitasking. Okay, you'll find you open up a lot more capacity by reducing multitasking. You can focus on finishing the work that's currently in the pipeline. It enhances teamwork. You can have people in operations pairing up with developers to try and de-bottleneck some of the release tasks. Maximise throughput. You've got a fixed capacity. You know, it's not always possible to just start shipping in more and more people into a team. I'm sure we've all come across that in the past. So actually what you've got to do is you've got to make the best possible use of the capacity that you've already got. Okay. And the golden rule is stop starting and start finishing. Here's an example of a real board. This is a team. You can clearly see where the bottleneck is there. This is that chasm between dev and ops. Okay. But once it's visible, it means it's out there. People can start to problem solve. We can see some blockers on the board. Again, it encourages people to go and actually help to unblock that work. We can see where our capacity is on the board at any point in time. So everybody's busy. What's the point in pulling more work in? Let's focus on finishing the work we've currently got in play.
All right, so on that example where we start to move into the continuous delivery space, these huge sort of bottlenecks for development teams just sitting there and test. You just showcase it, job done. Woo! Right. But what are the conversations that aren't happening in that team? How are we getting this into production? How are we starting to realise that value? How are we starting to put it in front of the entire organisation that we need to start working together? We need to start collaborating across the entire piece. And one of the reasons we sort of asked you guys to stand up when you first came in is just a classic sort of metric from early days of Lean by Mary Poppendale around how long it actually takes you to get a piece of code into production, but also the repeatability and the reliability of that. How often are you able to do that in a confident manner? And some teams, you know, we've seen the room sort of stand up, stand down. Some people are taking a year to do this. Some people are taking a couple of days. There's huge variance in that. What's going on? What are the techniques they're doing? How are we trying to improve that? Thinking about the cycle time it takes from inception to production.
I mean, environments are possibly the most tricky area of when we're doing software development. You know, you can very rarely recreate your live environment in your dev area. Okay, so again, this is the whole DevOps space, and I'm trying to get more collaboration between these areas, and actually moving your operations into development as well. Okay, so getting developers to start scripting these environments out ahead of time. We refer to this last mile. Actually, for us, we consider the last mile the whole pipeline. Okay, so it's not just your live environment, it's all your environments before that. And how can we, get repeatable, reliable environments around those spaces?
All right, so I guess another concept we want to talk about, the idea of if something hurts, you should do it as much as possible to make it not hurt. Or if you're afraid of something, keep doing it so you don't become afraid of it. And what we often see in this idea of releasing is that you have these huge sort of times, this could be, say, a couple of months, where you've not only building up technical risk, but you're building up business risk. So when a package gets bigger and bigger, more complicated, more integration points, when you deploy that huge batch into production, there's always going to be errors. There's more complexity in that package. When you have a package that has never been tested by your customers that gets bigger and bigger, just one more feature. It's all stuff that hasn't been tested and validated with your customers. So again, another risk. And this is when we see these huge change sets going in, it's huge challenges, there's huge risk for the business that you're losing out on. But the idea of doing it smaller change sets more frequently, cutting down that feedback loop, the time it takes for you to get something out there, to get a response, We deployed a change that broke something, let's fix it. We deployed a feature, the customers don't like it, let's back it out. Having that sort of feedback loop quite quick and fast gives you a lot more ability to steer where you want to do, rather than deploying a huge package that has 7 different things in it, 3 of them fail, what do we do? So starting to just think about that from a different perspective.
Let's just look at this diagram again. So when we talk about done, does deploy mean done when it's in a live environment? Even in the Scrum world, does deploy mean done? You know, in Kanban, are we deploying every day? Are we done every single day? What do we mean by done? What's after done? Okay, so we want to just start talking more about now this whole cycle that we seem to get hung up on what's done.
And what we see actually in a lot of different organizations is that just getting something into production environment isn't good enough. They want to validate that with customers. Their board goes beyond just into production. It goes into, is this feature useful? Is this something we want to keep? Do we want to commission this? Using data from what we see when it's in there, if it's useful or not. So it's really up for you to decide how long this chain goes. What's important to you as a business? What are the things you're interested in? What do you need to measure? What informs you about what you might want to do next? So just going to talk a little bit about examples of some of these metrics and how you measure things. There's a host of tools and techniques that are really popular at the moment. You have things like A/B testing, putting 2 versions of the application out in different areas, seeing how users react to that, going at one or another. Google are a master of this. You'll see the backgrounds, colors change, button shades, language. This stuff goes out all the time, continually put in front of the customers to get feedback. Other things like Net Promoter Scores. But what I'm just going to show here is an example that especially comes out of the Lean Startup movement, really popular in that, is about cohort analysis and funnel conversion. So a classic example of a funnel on most websites might be a customer visiting the site, maybe performing a search, seeing a result set. They might view a product and then go on to purchase it. You can think of maybe like Amazon's basic sort of user journey through that. And on the left here, we have the sort of conversion funnel. So of all the users that went to that site, 100% visited it. Maybe 65% went on to perform a search operation. 35 went on to view the results. Maybe 15 went on to actually view the product. And maybe 5% went on to actually purchase. So when we deployed our software, we start to measure how users are interacting with that. We start to get these metrics, all right? We start to get this data. Then we do a release. What happens? What's been the impact of this release, do you think, on our software? So more people are getting through to the search page, but this has just dropped off a huge amount, right? What were we working on? What deployment did we do? What change did we make? How's that adversely affecting our customers? They don't like that change. Is there a bug there? Is it broken? It gives us that feedback extremely quickly to understand that there could be a problem there that we might need to focus on. It gives the team an opportunity to focus on what they should prioritize to work on next. We've got data to say there's a problem here. How can we react to that? So it starts to become objective. It's not someone thinking, oh no, we need to build another feature somewhere else. No, we need to keep working on the homepage because the homepage is really awesome. No, we've got a problem here. We need to react to that. And you can see different examples here as it moves along. Maybe the team start to fix that bug. Maybe they do enhancements in that area. Over time as they're doing these deployments, you can start to see, well, there's a big gap down here. What are we not doing in our buy funnel? Let's focus area around that. Much more interesting, much more objective about where we need to focus our efforts to improve.
And what if these are release numbers along the bottom. What if the time taken between release 5 and 6 was 3 months or 9 months? That's a lot of time when you're flatlining as an organisation. So we talk about feedback. Does it end at live? Is that done? Okay. So I've seen a number of teams who will set up a large monitor at the end of the board, and they'll start to get this analysis appearing on this board, on this monitor. Some will just have a simple whiteboard, and they'll just start to chalk up some of the actual stats that they have on a daily basis. We had a marketing team who are using Kanban for their campaign management. And at the end of their value stream was another monitor which said what's the actual uptake of their campaigns. So this is all really useful information that was being pumped to the actual teams on a daily basis, so they could see that. Does anybody here measure past live? Does anybody have a similar thing?
Don't be shy, get it up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 1, 2.
Yeah. And do you find that the development team are actually interested in these stats?
Few.
Yeah. Well, that's what I find. They're actually quite passionate about this. You know, and a lot of the guys from the business say, well, you know, developers, how can they be interested in this? Well, they're really interested in seeing how their software is performing in that live environment. They'll also rotate around and maybe have some technical information on there as well, you know, about the performance of the servers. But actually, this is the stuff that they really sort of get off on quite regularly. But again, this is about the feedback loops. You know, you can have Kanban, you can have Lean Stars, continuous delivery, but without this feedback loop, you know, you risk delivering more of the wrong thing quicker. Okay, so it's critical that you get this feedback loop in.
And it's making the conversations objective. You have actual data to back up. Why are we having this conversation? It's not my opinion versus your opinion, let's get in a fight about it. We've got something to talk around, all right?
Okay, so what's the common thread between these three areas? So one of the things we've been doing a lot with our teams is introducing the metric of cycle time. Okay, it's a very simple metric that's very easy to actually measure. Anybody here measuring cycle time within their teams currently?
1, 2.
2, 3. Great stuff. So let's go and talk about cycle time. So cycle time comes in many different forms, different ways of measuring it. So let's just give a few examples.
So this is an example of a client I'm currently working with, of how they're trying to drive out product discovery, right? Thinking about ideas and concepts. They invite anybody in the organization to come up and stick an idea up there. They can draw a picture, what it's going to be, what the functionality might be, write a note. But what they start to do quite quickly is get that idea and move it forward, get insights around it, build a prototype, start to test it with their customers, and validate whether that's actual functionality that they want to start building. And they're doing this in a matter of days, weeks. Really quick feedback loops about what they're doing, iterating around different versions, different designs of what users like, what they don't like. Getting that feedback really quickly and a lot more confident in the product when they build it and release it before it ever goes into the development team. And there's always this visibility of what's happening. People in the business can come by and see, spark conversations around what's happening. Product managers sitting down and discussing about what's happening. These are the ideas that we're doing. What ones do we want to do? What ones should we bin? What's happening in the design process? What's happening for our product? What's the future of this organization? Simple questions. And guess what? Isn't that a nice little Kanban wall? Look, it's got these nice visualizing what's happened. Like, it's not rocket science, this stuff, but it's very powerful about how it can drive the conversations. People walk down the hall and see this. They become interested. They want to know what's happening.
I think also, if you start to socialize the idea of cycle time as a metric, it's a cross-functional measurement. So everyone starts to buy into this idea of, well, yeah, how can we contribute? How can we help with this? Even if in a dev space, you know, maybe you measure cycle time from the point at which work starts to the point it gets released. But the important thing is it's not a measurement of the speed of the developers or how quick the testers are testing. This is a cross-functional measurement, okay? Everyone can start to contribute to this. You get your ops guys starting to come downstream, pairing maybe with developers, because that may be the way that they can help to actually reduce cycle time. And people start getting really creative around this, ways of actually reducing that. Cycle time's not just a single figure. It's not something you say, well, our cycle time this week is 4 days, so let's all pull together and try and make it 3 days next week, okay? It's subject to variation. This is one way that we can visualize our variation and see what so this is a control chart. We simply plot on here for each story, each task maybe going through the system, how long did it take? What we see is at some point, they made a step change in their process. They improved their process. They reduced variation quite significantly. The red lines is just a standard deviation calculation, showing you what should fall within the norms of this process. The things outside of the red line, they're your outliers. They're the signals in the system to say to you, you might want to go and look at there, go and do some root cause investigation around that. What is the thing that made that particular story take longer than the rest? Okay.
Yeah, so really just to start to give everybody a flavour of how all these practices exist. They can exist independently, but how they can all coexist together. That there's common themes that run through all of this. And a lot of it is really about trying to measure, but also reduce the cycle times that you go through to actually start to get feedback about what you're doing. And the result of that leads to amplified learning about what you're doing, be it your product discovery work, be it how we're delivering as an organization versus getting production-ready software. All these can coexist together, but it's all driven from this concept of making it visible, understanding how long it takes, and learning from that.